I'm rising today to speak in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I bet if you asked all 98 of us, or 97 of us, unless you're looking in the mirror, why we decided to come down here and do this thing we do, we'd all have similar themes, but from slightly different contexts. And for me, a big part of my story involves the deaf community. My grandmother was born profoundly deaf. My grandfather went deaf, lost all of his hearing at the age of 4. They lived a very hard life. Them being my grandparents, it was certainly a different time and place, and they lacked many of the traditional supports that we all take for granted here in the year 2023. They probably wouldn't have had much of a life at all were it not for deaf education here in Washington State. My grandmother was a graduate of Washington State School for the Deaf, and they both went on to teach at the State Deaf School for a long time. But despite some of that success, they had a hard life. My grandfather, because of his inability to hear, he never actually learned how to read. He was a linotype operator for the News Tribune, and that's pretty remarkable that you could lay out the words on a newspaper and not actually know how to read the words you're laying out, but he figured it out. And so they lived a really hard life and really struggled to make it, really struggled to provide for my dad and his brother and sister. They did so, and they would not have been able to do so were it not for their ability to access education opportunities and instill that desire to learn and be motivated in my dad, who I think tried his best to pass that down to me. So knowing how integral the deaf community and supports as rare as they were 75 years ago for the deaf community, knowing what a role that played in allowing me to be on this House floor, this is kind of a no-brainer for me. The gentleman from the 9th District mentioned that there's pros and cons to this bill, and he's absolutely right. In our exuberance to help everybody we can possibly help, we run the risk of hurting people inadvertently, and that risk is not non-existent for this bill. It will raise costs for people who don't need a hearing aid, people like me. But having seen what my grandparents went through and the struggles they had, I think this one's worth it. As the gentleman from the 33rd District pointed out, and I deeply appreciate her leadership on this issue, allowing kids access to this kind of hearing aid can open up quite literally, Mr. Speaker, a whole new world for them. And not just allow them to live better lives, but allow them to do better in school, allow them to be more integrated members of our society, and remove some of those impediments that would otherwise exist through no fault of their own. So I realize that this bill is not without cost, but I look back at how valuable it would have been to folks in my family and the community that they were part of, and think that it's the right move to make sure that everybody in Washington, if the medical opportunity is there for a hearing device to help them out, to be able to make sure they can have access to that, even if they can't afford it. Because my grandparents, had this technology existed, they couldn't have afforded it anyway. But hopefully somebody else's grandkids will get the opportunity to do this that they otherwise wouldn't have, and really appreciate the ability to have this bill on the House floor today. So please vote yes, Mr. Speaker.